Andy, hi, welcome to the podcast today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I wanted to say from the outset that with my background in nursing, I've got deep respect for podiatrists when we would have, patients coming in and you'd take their socks off and you just never know what you'd find underneath. And we as nurses, we would have the ability to then just say, I think we need a podiatry review or referral, and we could handball.
Well, you take the socks off and there's this cloud of skin that floats in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. So, deep respect for what you guys deal with on a daily basis. Absolutely. Just from your perspective and your background, can you give us some insight into how you got to where you're at today? I know you've got a bit of a sporting background as well, so just share something of yourself.
Okay, so I've been a podiatrist for 20 years now. So I left school and went into university studying podiatry, and then straight into a private practice job or multiple private practice jobs, and then ran my own business alongside someone else for 18 years until 18 months ago, where I decided to go. I didn't want to be in partnership anymore. Mainly because of the way I was changing the way my practice, and my business partner didn't want to change. So yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell. But definitely the first 15 years I was a traditional podiatrist, and then just through my own experience with strengthening feet and overall body awareness, I started changing the way I practice into a more of a holistic approach to podiatry and feet. Yeah.
And so was like what made that change? Was it just an experimentation? Was something you read that piqued your curiosity?
So 10 years ago, or maybe 11 now, there was a book, I forget what it's called, but anyway, it's all about running barefoot. And so I remember clients coming to me then, just to sort of show you where I'm coming from, saying, why can't I do this? Why do I need to have a supportive shoe? Why do I need my orthotics? And I can remember saying, oh, you just need them. I had all the excuses and I didn't even look into it at all. Born to Run is the name of the book. It's a famous book.
Oh, yeah.
And so then I just dismissed it, and it sort of died a pretty quick death, the whole barefoot movement then. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it started up again because of what I call the movement, like people getting into moving more functionally and living lifestyles that are more around moving rather than just going to the gym for an hour a day. And so personally, I was doing a lot of cycling, and I was very one-dimensional. So I only cycled and I just worked, and I would even struggle to carry my kids on my shoulders because I was worried about tiring my legs out, It was all about I wouldn't even want to go for a walk with my wife because I didn't want to tire myself out for riding well. And
were you professional, Andy?
Just not professional. I never got paid. But I trained as I was a professional.
Okay.
I was a professional podiatrist pretending to be a cyclist. So it was taking up a lot of time and probably not very balanced. And I'm not saying cyclists are like that now. Like even cyclists are weight training and looking at a whole lot of other aspects of their training now. But for me, I was very much one-dimensional. I remember having a lot of back issues and neck issues, probably from sitting on the bike a lot. And I'd see an osteo regularly to either recover from injuries from falling off or just for maintenance. And I remember an osteo asking me to squat, and I couldn't get my thighs below parallel, and I didn't even think anything of it. I didn't even know, like as a podiatrist, that I didn't even know how important our hips were in relation to our feet at that point. So then I went to a yoga class just randomly. I'd had some accidents falling off my bike and I couldn't ride for a little while. And I went to a yoga class and started doing a whole lot of yoga because I couldn't ride. And my whole body just changed and my mindset changed and my feet started getting stronger. And I'd always been a bit hesitant in prescribing orthotics anyway. And I probably had a reputation as a podiatrist that I didn't overprescribe like some podiatrists do. And I think I was hesitant because of the financial investment that people make when they get a customized orthotic. And then I felt like the responsibility was on me because they'd paid this money for the orthotic. And so I found that really hard to deal with. And so I always found that hard to deal with. So then physios or osteos, they're far more likely to strengthen and mobilize parts of the body. And I just thought we should be able to do this for feet. And then I found some other podiatrists doing it, and reached out to them and other health professionals, and just started building up this knowledge base of different ways to strengthen the feet that I hadn't been taught before, and using my own body as a bit of as an experiment, really. So I got rid of my own orthotics and I started training barefoot and going into barefoot shoes, and just becoming a more holistic mover of my body rather than so one-dimensional. I still had quit cycling. I don't really ride at all anymore. And that just, I just thought I need to be doing this for my clients as well. And I really like working with people that are motivated to look after themselves. And so I now act as an educator for people and as a resource, because I have a good depth of knowledge on the foot function because of my podiatry degree and years of experience. But then because I'm so interested in movement and how that affects the feet and tying it all together, I think a lot of people are on this journey of bettering their physical health, and I can just kind of be a bit of a resource for them along the way when it's about their feet. And so this way I'm giving people the responsibility to look after themselves with me as a helper. So I feel a lot better about that.
Because I've heard you say that, and from what I've seen as well, that the model of podiatry is the whole business model is very much around prescribing orthotics.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously an expectation that as a podiatrist, that's what you do when people come and see you. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think now maybe at uni they're teaching a little bit differently. So it's not so much about that. It is looking at other aspects of strength and conditioning and mobility, but definitely when I was through it was a high focus, and I think still in most private practices it's the go-to for therapy for biomechanic issues, and so I know that there's some big chains of podiatrists out there that definitely are really counting how many orthotics you prescribe and making sure that that's okay, you know, that's you're ticking that box. Whereas I've prescribed 2 orthotics in the last 2 years, and that wouldn't tick the KPI performances for some of these big chains. And my clients might take longer to get better, but they have a more, I think they'll end up with a better understanding of how their body moves and have long-term benefits from it compared to having an orthotic or some of these other. Podiatry is also a little bit about a quick fix. So there's other things that people do as podiatrists that are about helping people out of pain, which is important, obviously. But that's, I think, a better measure is long-term function without pain, as opposed to, you know, here's something that helps you tomorrow. So I definitely deal with people that have seen a lot of podiatrists and haven't been successful, and so they bang their head against the wall. And then when they come to me, they tend to know that it's going to be a bit of a long haul
to recover.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they have very good. Generally, when people come to me, they have expectations that are lower than if you're just going to the podiatrist on the corner and want a quick fix.
Yeah. Interesting. I know from my own experience with changing to barefoot, I had discomfort for a couple of weeks, and I sort of had to do bit of barefoot shoe, bit of not barefoot shoe, bit of barefoot walking.
Yeah.
But the improvement just in my overall posture, hips particularly, and back pain was extraordinary. Can you talk about the relationship between the feet and why people might see improvement in their back pain or hip pain by going barefoot?
So firstly on that, when you talk about having a bit of a struggle to get used to going without, and for those that don't know, a barefoot shoe doesn't have a heel on it. And so nearly every other shoe does have some sort of raised heel compared to the forefoot height. And so when our bodies have been exposed to that from probably around the age of 3 or 4, they get used to the body gets used to stacking itself, standing up on a heel. And so when we take that heel away, there's an adjustment period. And some people are barefoot at home and are natural barefooters. And so they take it, it's a lot easier for them to get used to it. But other people take months, sometimes even years to get used to it because it's such a big change for them after being, for their developmental years, in a shoe that's got a heel on it. And so it's like a scissor jack that jacks up a car. This is one of my favorite analogies, that when we move one joint in a different way, all the other joints have to move in a different way to accommodate. And so when we put a heeled shoe on, it's changing the ankle joint into a position that's not its natural position. It's like you're standing on a hill all the time, and your knee, your hip, your lower back, all the way up through to your neck will be adjusting accordingly to keep your head over the back of your foot, over your heels. And otherwise we'd all be walking around on a lean. And so when we put on a flat shoe, it takes a bit of adjustment to get your body back to the way it's meant to be. But the good news is that, that sounds really tacky. The good news is that our body really likes going back to the way it is. And you would find this, I'm sure, with your nutrition as well. Like when you impose a change like an orthotic, which is not a natural way, it can take a lot of getting used to because it's really jamming up joints and changing things. When you change back to the way the body's meant to be, it's like the body almost breathes a sigh of relief, like, oh, good, it knows to go back to that innate way. But it's not just shoe change that makes a big difference either. Like as much as I ask people to change their shoes, I also ask them to sitting less, because our hips are the best orthotic available, because they're the things that control our feet the most. And so if we're sitting a lot, our hips become very one-dimensional. And so if you're going to go barefoot, you have to try and look at it's a holistic approach to your foot health.
And so for people where they just don't have a choice, they've got a desk job, or you know, there's limited opportunity to flex, move, sit on the floor, whatever, what can they do to help?
So I think there's very few situations where people can't make those changes these days. I think it's if you're really wanting to make big changes to your overall health and well-being, you've got to look at the big things, because I could give you 10 exercises to do every day, and some very motivated people do them 6 days a week for 3 weeks, you know. But the big changes come from changing lifestyle habits of sitting, of moving. And so there are very few jobs that really require someone that you can't have that flexibility. And those situations are going into a new job. Like, you don't want to be the person going into a new job saying, I need a standing desk. Like that's going to be an issue. So then you're going to have to do your exercises more. I think some people have to do their exercises and have this movement-based life. But generally what I see is have people doing all these exercises while they're making their changes to their life. And then you can wean off the exercises because your life is doing those exercises.
Yeah.
And the barefoot shoe is a really good example of that. Like, I can give you all the exercises in the world to strengthen your feet, but the ultimate foot strengthening exercises is walking without support. Your foot has to get stronger. And so we might have to do those foot exercises to start with, but then you'll end up not having to do them because you're in a shoe that makes your foot get stronger on its own. So to get back to that, like if you're in that situation, another one of those situations is a tradie on a union work site has to have a steel cap boot on. And so then it's about doing the right thing or the better thing all the rest of the time. So it's being in toes. If they've got to wear a steel cap boot that's squishing their toes, then they're the people that are going to have to wear toe spaces more often, those things that spread your toes. They're the people that are going to need to do some more lacrosse ball, massage ball rolling on the sole of the foot. So they're the ones that might have to have a routine to offset all that time in those boots. So there are some situations like that. Though now there is a work boot made by Birkenstock, which means it's flat and it's wide and it's got a steel cap, but it's still got a lot of support and not very flexible. So it's some of the way, it's a better option than a lot of the work boots out there.
Oh, interesting. That's a good shift in the climate of barefoot shoes.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
Birkenstock. Yeah.
The Birkenstock, yeah, they're not making a barefoot shoe, but they're just making a work boot that's got it's got a steel cap. And so I would see like a barefoot shoe, for those that don't know, is wide at the toes, and it's very thin. So the sole is really thin, so you can feel the ground. It's flat from heel to toe, so there's no drop, there's no like tip, and it's flexible, so all your joints can move. And so that's like a pure barefoot shoe compared to a normal shoe, which has got a heel, it's stiff, it's got cushioning, so it's got a thick sole, and it's not flexible at all, and it's not wide, it's pointy at the toe. And so Birkenstock are what I would call a transition shoe. They're wide, they're flat, but they're still got a lot of something between the ground and your foot, so you can't feel the ground so much, and they're not flexible, they're quite stiff, and so they give you arch support. So they're called a transition shoe. So people that have worn them a lot can sometimes more easily get into a barefoot shoe. And there are other brands that tick that box of being a transition shoe. They have some of the features of a barefoot shoe, but not all of them. And so this Birkenstock work boot is good because it's got it's broad at the toe and it's flat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it took me a little while to convince my husband to come along the barefoot shoe journey,
Yeah.
and even more so my kids. But so what's your perspective on kids in barefoot shoes? How we even do shoes from an early age? And then also like looking at kids through their schooling and with the shoes that they often have to wear for certain schools, and things that parents can keep in mind with kids' shoes.
Yeah. So when a child is first walking, the child maternal healthcare nurse will say for them to be in a wide, thin, flat, flexible shoe, which, as I just described, is a barefoot shoe. And that's because their foot is developing. That's why we're told they need that shoe, just something to protect them from heat, cold, or something sharp. And my message, or what I'm on about, is that should never change. The foot, especially until 20 years of age, is developing constantly. And so if we're putting them in that shoe because their foot is developing when they're 18 months of age to when they're 3, what changes after that? All that changes, so that was a rhetorical question, all that changes is that we are priming them to wear a supportive shoe for the rest of their life. So if we wear a Nike or an Asics, well, let's get our kids into them from when they're 3, so then they'll be used to wearing them. Because if they never wore their Nike or their Asics when they were 3 or 4, all the way through to when they were 20, for example, and you put them in that shoe when they were 20, it would be one of the most uncomfortable experiences for their feet because they'd be used to having a mobile foot. So unfortunately, the message for some reason changes when they're 3 or 4, because if you just go down to the local kinder, there's every kid in their little Nikes, their little Asics, their little supportive shoes. And I think this is a traditional way of thinking for some reason, that we need to support the body in its development. It might be to do with, because that's also coincides with when we get them sitting a lot. And so that's when we're more likely to have our hips not working as well as they should. But really the message should never change. It should always be a wide, thin, flat, flexible shoe. And for kids, probably up to the age of 12 or 15 even, it's one of the easiest transitions because they haven't had all the years of, so if you've got your kids in like this one, in like traditional school shoes or your Asics or your Nikes, then they can easily go back to a minimalist shoe because it's not long ago, and they're still changing, that it's a really easy transition compared to someone who's 40 and has been in those bad shoes for 30 years. So it's an easy change. The hardest part about with kids is the fact that the shoes look different to their friends.
Yes,
so if you can, often it's about just letting them see you experience it or having other kids experience it as well. I know my son was an easy change because we had he's 11 now, and it happened for him about 8, when he was 8. We had a summer holiday where he was barefoot the whole time and loved it. And so you can use experiences like that, where you just have them barefoot, just encourage them to be barefoot. And then and what I noticed from people telling me is that they'll buy their kids a barefoot shoe, and the kids just prefer it in the end. So then they'll end up doing it out of comfort sake rather than their other shoe.
Mm.
I bribed my daughter to wear them for 6 months. And that worked because she doesn't have to wear them now, and she still is. So, she's 14. She's very headstrong, so she doesn't care what other kids think so much. So it makes it easier for me. But I've also explained the why, and she hears me talking about the why enough. So kids aren't stupid. If you explain to them why, they are on board generally pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then activity base is an issue. Like last year with COVID, my kids didn't play soccer. So for a year they were out of their soccer boots, and this year going back into their soccer boots after being in anything but a wide, thin, flat, flexible shoe or barefoot for a year. They have pain after every training session and every game, but it's a non-negotiable. That's like the builder. Like we can't do anything about their soccer boots. There's not a good option for them. So they just, an hour later they're fine. It's for 2 to 3 hours a week. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But I think, and in terms of your husband, it's not good to nag about these things. I'm not suggesting you do, but I know that I could get into that phase, and people do nag about but people will come about the change when they're ready to.
Yeah.
And so just explaining to them why, and being there to answer questions. And, an injury is often a good opportunity, like if they get sore or injured, or if they've always got tight calves. Like no wonder we always have tight calves. Our calf is always in a shortened position when we're in a heeled shoe. Like I haven't stretched my calves for years now because my foot is flat all the time, so my calf is working at its optimal length. It doesn't need stretching,
Yeah.
So people come about when they're ready, and if they're not ready, and it also makes complete sense that we don't have something supportive on our foot all the time, and there's some really good arguments around that, and so just being prepared with those things is really powerful, I think.
It's interesting, from my husband's perspective, he had, I think, a pair before COVID, but then was working from home and was just barefoot at the desk at home. Yeah. And then, I think he changed jobs and then didn't need the fancy suit and super pointy shoes.
Yeah.
And just absolutely fell in love with the Vivos and the barefoot shoes after that, and he would absolutely not go back now.
There's I know of only a couple of people that have gone back because they had too many troubles, but there's always going to be that situation. There are now some really nice pointy shoes that replace those pointy business shoes, because what's the point of a pointy business shoe anyway? It's a stupid societal expectation to wear. Even the whole suit is something that's so constrictive to our movement. Yeah. But there are now shoes that you could easily wear with a suit. They look just like it, except they're broad at the toe and they're functional. And you could run a marathon in them if you were that way inclined. Because that's the beauty of these shoes. They're all just the same, just providing protection to the sole. They just look a bit different on top.
I wanted to ask you sort of two things in particular. One is there's not brand specific, but there's shoes emerging that are created by podiatrists, which often have very high heels and don't look any different.
Yeah.
And but people say, oh, well, they're podiatrist approved, so they're fine. So that's something I want to ask you about. And then the other thing is, when you talk to people about, have you considered a barefoot shoe? And people say, but I have flat feet, I can't go barefoot. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so for sure. For the first one, there's a couple of brands, maybe 3 or 4 in Australia, that are approved by podiatrists or designed by podiatrists. I did a series in my Instagram called Designed by Podiatrists, What Were They Thinking? Because there's no way the foot can be naturally functional in those shoes. They're heeled, they're heavy, they've got arch, they've got support, they're pointed at the toe. That's probably the biggest deal breaker for me, that they're pointed at the toe, because as soon as we push that big toe joint sideways, it just stops it functioning properly. And so this is where traditional podiatry is at, and podiatrists are suggesting people go into those shoes, and so that's And so when podiatrists are doing strength and conditioning, but they're not changing the shoe and they're still providing a brace in the form of an orthotic that they leave in for the long term, I think the strength and conditioning and mobility is basically just ticking the box. And if you say to someone, here's an orthotic that's going to cost like $600, and here's some shoes that are like another $300, and they're all podiatrist designed. This is all about the podiatrist, and they spend $1,000 on this setup. And then you give them some exercises to do. Let's just see if they do those exercises. It's very unlikely they'll end up doing the exercises, and their foot will feel better initially because it's being cocooned. It's like sitting on the couch. It feels good, you know, but it's not going to be good for it in the long term. And it's not going to be good for your overall function in the long term, and especially not your foot function. And so, but that's where standard podiatries are at. They are doing some of the strength and conditioning, but they're not changing the shoe, or they're even suggesting really rigid, stiff. Like there's a brand called Hoka, Hoka. They're not designed by podiatrists, but they're like a rocker bottom. They basically are seriously like just sitting on the couch all day for your foot. I went and tried them on just to see what it felt like, and my foot was just offline. It loads the ankle more, it loads other joints more, but really it takes your foot out of the equation in terms of function. And when you do that, you miss out on a whole cascade of effects that happen because your foot's functioning properly through your whole body. And so, you know, podiatrists, I think when things get too hard, they end up with a client in an orthotic and this type of shoe, and it just, the foot feels better because it's just not functioning. You know, this is not doing its thing at all. So, you know, sometimes there's some hard yards to be done, and some people don't mind that. It means they can still run next week. They don't have to reduce their mileage. They don't have to change anything else in their life. They can still sit at a desk. They can still, whereas this approach is really about holistic change to more than just your footwear. And it's probably not dissimilar to what you do. If you're changing the way you eat, and with the perspective of your approach, it infiltrates into so much more of your life, which is probably why we're talking, because not only are you looking into the way people are eating, but the way they're moving, and then what is natural for the human body to do. You know, like it's the human body's been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and we're imposing upon it a very strict set of circumstances in a very short period of time, and no wonder it's breaking down. Mm-hmm. And so these approaches aren't just looking at the foot or just looking at nutrition. It's looking at the whole approach, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that was the first part of the question, and what was the second part?
Just around having
flat feet.
Flat feet. Yeah.
So flat feet. So a lot of my clients have flat feet, or they think they've got flat feet, or they come in saying, I've got flat feet. I've been told I've got flat feet. I overpronate, all this type of stuff. The shape of our foot doesn't matter. And I might have to say that another 1,000,000 times in my lifetime, because people always label their foot with a shape, and it doesn't really matter the way the foot moves. No, sorry, the way the foot is shaped. It's all about the way it moves and the way our body functions with our foot. And so one of my clients recently, I've been seeing her for a couple of years now. So she comes to me saying she's got flat feet. She's been on orthotics for years and has a lot of injuries. And then she decided to get rid of them herself and went into a more minimalist shoe and changed her running technique herself, still getting injuries. And then we added in more of movement practice. So she's not just a runner now. So she's like doing yoga and Pilates and making her body a functional moving thing as opposed to just a running thing. And this foot that looks flat now still looks flat, but when it's functioning, it has this mobility and control because the rest of her body is helping move that foot. And so it doesn't matter the shape. It's more about how your body is moving it. There's very few situations where it's a very small percentage of the population where it's a true flat foot that can't be made into an arch or that can't be controlled out of that flat position. And so those people might need some support. There is those cases, you know. There's also the opposite, a really high arched foot, which is often a stiff foot. And mostly they need more mobility and strength and control. But again, if the body is working well with that, there's no perfect scenario. And I think podiatry has been built around, the profession of podiatry has this idea of a perfect foot, and that we should all be working towards this perfect looking and functioning foot. But none of us are symmetrical, none of us are the same. And many of us function really, really, really well with what we've got, and our body just organizes itself really well around what it's got. And so it's not really about the way it looks at all. If you support a flat foot for a long time, you're probably going to need support, and take longer to get rid of your support, because if you had a neck brace on for 20 years, you would probably take a long time to get that off. You know, like you'd have to do a lot of strength work. And so for those that say, I've got flat feet, I can't go barefoot, it's mostly because they've been told that and haven't ever done anything to make their foot more functional. Like, it's just tradition that we support the foot, and it's just a crazy tradition, really.
It's interesting. Like shoes, orthotics, in a way, it's the same to cardiology as a blood pressure tablet is. It's just there's no exploratory stuff done about why you've got the issue.
It's just like it's a band-aid. And it's not addressing the causes at all. Exactly. It's a really good analogy.
Bunions, genetic, not genetic, caused by shoes, not caused by shoes. What's the deal? And just the importance of the big toe.
So I've got my foot model here. I try and usually when I'm on the screen, I try and wear something darker so you can see it against my shin. But so these two bones, these ones, the metatarsals, they're ideally close to being parallel. In some people, they're more like this. There's a bigger gap between the first and second, okay? And so when there's a bigger gap, if that person never put a shoe on, they'd have a beautiful toe splay like this. And if you looked at a baby's foot, it's widest from tip to tip, but then nearly everyone else's foot is widest from base, like the bunion to the little toe base, and then squashed, because our shoes do that. Our shoes are widest here and then squash, as opposed to straight here, okay? So if you have a space like this, a bigger space, naturally that happens, then a shoe that pushes the big toe in is more likely to do that.
Okay.
So the genetic predisposition to a bunion is that. Just hold on a second. I'm not answering. Sorry about that. The genetic predisposition to a bunion is this space, and then people that are more likely to be hypermobile, which is like, or more mobility in their joints. So there's some, like, to be very general speaking, there's some big, strong guys that are really stiff that have got this big joint like this, and when they put their foot in a shoe like this, it pushes it sideways, and they take the shoe off and it's back there again. The joint is very stiff. Women are more likely to be more mobile, and so that's, I think this is why, one of the reasons why women have more bunions than men, because they're more mobile. And so when we do this to the joint, it's more likely to stay like that, okay? It's more affected by the joint. But then women are also more likely to wear shoes that squish their toes together. So, but men do get bunions, but and there's many mobile men as well. I'm being very generalized when I say that, those two things. But yeah, the genetic component is that, and the mobility, and then maybe the genetic predisposition to wear pointy shoes. So really, they are genetic in those factors. This is the way I see it.
Sure.
And because they're, again, traditional podiatry will say that they are genetic. The bunions are genetic, but I think if you have those two things happening and never wear a shoe, I doubt you'll have a bunion.
Okay.
And like, I saw a 10-year-old the other day with, like, there's 4 stages of bunions, and she's already got stage 3, which is not great. She's been in minimalist shoes, wide shoes, for 2 years. So for those first 6 years of wearing shoes, maybe 2 to 8, they had enough of an effect on her. And looking at her x-ray, it's like this. It's unbelievable. And she's generally mobile, not hypermobile, but the shoe has had such an effect on her already. But it was a huge gap between her first and second mets.
And how old did you say she was?
10.
10. Wow.
Yeah, so she's already in minimalist shoes and wearing spaces, and you know, things will. She'll always have some bony change there, but she'll probably have really highly functional feet because her parents are onto it. There's no orthotic that's going to change that child's foot bunion, you know. And if you don't change her shoes, it's only going to get worse because all normal shoes still do this.
And so then, what's the impact of that upstream?
Yeah, on the big toe. So when you push the big toe, so when you don't push through that big toe, let's talk about when you do push through it properly. When it's straight, it is a bit of an arch support as well. So you'll see someone with a bunion have their foot collapsing more often because they don't have a straight big toe anymore, because the straight big toe stops the foot collapsing. Also, if your hips aren't really controlling what your foot's doing, your foot's more likely to collapse, which is more likely to give you a bunion as well. So there's a couple of things going on upstream there, but then it's a bit chicken or egg because it's harder for the hip to control your foot if it's not working in unison with a straight big toe. If the straight big toe is not there, then it's a lot harder for the hip to control.
Wow.
Going on. So they work well. As you push off through a straight big toe, all the muscles on the inside of the foot, up into the inside of the leg, through the inside of the thigh, into the pelvic floor, switch on and make us very efficient movers. And so if you're not using that, you're missing out on that efficiency. This is why humans are able to walk and walk and walk for all day, because of this efficient motion through the big toe. So if we push that big toe sideways, it just doesn't work. So, yeah.
It's just amazing how, like, we don't really consider it. It's just we've got 5 toes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we gave up this, like our ancestors had an opposing big toe to little, so they could grip and climb and hold things. And we gave up the opposing thumb to have a straight big toe so that we can stand up. And that's why we are the reigning species, because we stood up and stand upright and our head is above our feet, as opposed to being crouched over like this with the opposing thumb. So we gave up a lot for this big toe to be such a functional part of why we move the way we do.
So what's the treatment? I mean, I've had patients where their big toe is really overlapping their other toes. So what? I mean, that's obviously quite severe. But what do you do with bunions or where there's that issue?
So the big toe. So if they have surgery, they actually cut this bone and straighten it.
Oh.
Yeah, and so they're not just cutting the bunion off; they're straightening the cause of the problem, which is that first metatarsal being on a wider angle, and then reshaping the joint if you still can. So that's the end stage surgery. And then often it'll come with, like, the foot's very unbalanced if you've got a bunion, and so they get claw toes as well. And so they often have to have straightening of those toes as well, pinning. So foot surgery is one of the worst to get over because of just where they are in our body. The blood's not flowing through, so healing takes a long time. They take a lot of load. So that's like the extreme. What I do now for bunions, so people that are overlapped, it's really hard. Like, it's almost, you can't do much about it, but you can still try and use toe spacers, toe exercises, things to try and strengthen the little muscles that hold your toes straight. Like, there's never a point where you can't be making it something better, you know, shoes that accommodate the space that we want, as opposed to keep pushing it in. And like I said before, if you want to get rid of your bunions but don't change your shoes, you're going to have to do a whole lot of exercises to make up for all that time in those poor shoes. So really, unless you're going to change your shoes, you're not going to get rid of your bunion. Hip, like, I work on foot strength and mobility, ankle strength and mobility, hip strength and mobility, just for a bunion. You know, like, we're not just seeing it at a localized level. Building up strength around the localized level within the rest of the foot, the ankle and the hip, because it's not just because of what's going on at the foot there.
Can you talk a little bit more around running and barefoot shoes? And you know, there's a lot of research around heel strike and hemolysis, or, you know, blood cell breakdown.
Yeah.
What's your sort of professional take on the impact of wearing barefoot shoes that might be protective for hemolysis, and just generally how running with a spongy shoe can impact the biomechanics.
Definitely. So if you look at a traditional running shoe from before about 1960, it's like a Dunlop volley. It's a very thin, that's like the athletic shoe of the time, would be just a shoe, a covering of the foot. So something thin, flat and flexible. They were a bit pointy because of fashion, which is not great. But then with the advent of the running boom in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of sedentary people starting to run and getting injured because they were, spending 8 hours a day at a desk and then getting up and running. And it's not the running that's causing the injury, it's the fact that they were sitting for 8 or 10 hours a day. It's very hard to have hips that extend properly when you've been sitting all day, and running requires good hip extension. And so these people were running and getting injured around their ankles. And so the shoe companies of the day put in heels to shoes, a cushioned heel, to accommodate this poor running technique. And then it's just become the norm. It's just become what all runners have. Well, there are very few that don't have cushioning and very few that don't have a heel either. And so when we put a cushioned heel in, it then encourages us to run with an overstriding pattern. And it's probably less about where your foot hits the ground. It's more that you are more likely to overstride. So this is like putting your foot out in front of you as opposed to just landing under you. And so when it goes out in front of you, it's like it's acting as a brake with every footstep. And so you need more energy to go forward because you'll keep putting your foot out as a brake out in front of you. So when you do put your foot out in front as a brake like that, there's a lot of pressure on the foot. And so this is why we need so much cushioning, because the foot is the best cushioning. It's the most able thing at absorbing shock. We're meant to be able to use our foot to shock absorb. And so if it doesn't have to do it, then it loses the ability to do it in one sense. And also, if you're going to overstride, like put your foot out the front like that, you're going to be hitting the ground a whole lot harder. And so this puts a lot of shock up through your body, through your foot, ankle, knee, hip, as opposed to when you land with your foot under your body, it's a lot softer landing and it's a lot lighter. Your foot's on the ground for a lot less time as well. This is not the shock going through, and you're using your joints in your foot and the rest of your body as little shock absorbers. They're all just working as shock absorbers. As opposed to using the shoe as a shock absorber, which goes straight through into your foot. So in terms of hemolysis, is that what it's called?
Yeah. So blood cell breakdown.
Yeah. So there's good research in there about the fact that runners get it because they hit their sole against the ground so many times, and the red blood cells actually break down in the sole of the foot, creating letting iron out, and so people are more likely to be iron deficient if they're running a lot.
Correct.
I don't know how it relates too much to barefoot running, but I do know that a barefoot running style or a natural running style is a lot lighter on the foot. And you can test this by listening to yourself running or even walking and listening to someone else walking or running and just hearing how hard you're hitting the ground. Like the more you hear it, the harder you're hitting the ground. And that's going to have, that's like a little easy way to test how well you're interacting with the ground. It should be a very smooth and soft landing. Like that's your foot working. If you're slapping the ground, your foot is not working, and there's going to be a lot of force going back up into your body. Your foot, with a cushioned shoe, cushioning doesn't take away the force. It just moves it somewhere else. It doesn't like soak it up and disperse it. It just goes somewhere else in your body. I think this is why we're seeing so many knee surgeries for worn out knees in people in their 50s, because they are on a heel, which is putting their knee in a position that's not natural all the time, and they're walking, running in shoes that are allowing them to hit the ground so hard. If you jump off a 1 meter thing into a bean bag or into one of those big cushioned pits, you don't have to do any shock absorbing for yourself. Those cushions do it for you. If you jump off onto concrete, your whole body will collapse in a way that absorbs the shock. And it's similar with every step when you're running in a heeled or cushioned shoe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. So what's next for you, Andy? What have you got happening coming up? Tell us where people can find you and what some of your plans are going forward.
So, in going up by myself at the start of last year, it was really unknown and I just needed a job. So I still have a little practice, which is a very regular podiatry practice. So I still, look after people's corns and toenails and ingrown toenails and things like that for probably, 70% of my work. And that's what a lot of podiatrists are doing, just that type of work. And it's good because it pays the bills and barefoot technology or natural podiatry is not wasted on those people either, because a lot of people have fungus, they have ingrown toenails, they have corns, and these are all pretty much all caused by shoes that have squished their feet for years. And so as much as I have the energy to, I am still passionate about teaching those people about moving better so that they don't even have to come and see me. Like ideally, I would put myself out of a job by getting people to move better and look after themselves better and have feet that don't need the help of someone like me. So there's that side of my work going. But the other side, the barefoot work, is definitely building quite quickly. There's not many other podiatrists doing this, unfortunately. But on that, where there's a group of podiatrists, or there's a physical therapist, which is a physio in Canada, and a podiatrist in the States and a podiatrist in London, and I are coming up with a curriculum called Natural Podiatry. And so there's going to be maybe 40 little subset topics where we're doing these other podiatrists that are this way inclined will be able to become part of this community. And so at the moment I'm filming my segments for that. It's like a 10-minute explanation of a subset of natural podiatry, and then a worksheet for these podiatrists to work through to try and better align their way of practicing with what natural podiatry is. Not so we can put the other podiatrists out of business, but just so that podiatrists are, that people out there have a choice, so that they can, if you're a natural podiatrist, people will understand what you're coming to see, and so that there can be a community of us all together, so we can better the whole process. Because I'm just doing what I find from this physio, from this, I just piece it all together. If there's 100 of us from around the world doing this, there must be better techniques that we can unify and learn from each other. So I'm doing that. That's taking up a bit of time. And yeah, I think the Foot Collective is a great resource for people. They've helped me a lot. This is the guy in Canada. And there's something called the Foot Nerd program that I'm part of. You don't have to be anything to do with feet. There's all different practitioners there. There's even not health practitioners as part of it. And so we're all putting our brains together to come up with better health solutions for people and better ways to do things. So I'm quite active in that regularly as well. But yeah, I've got a family and kids, so it's just life ticking on, renovating our house, a lot of stuff going on.
Sure. No, yeah. Great. Listen, thank you so much. Been so great to chat. Just really, really pleased. Thank you for being so generous with your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.